What is going on, everybody? Good to see you back here on the channel. Now today we're going to be talking about camera basics, but before we do that, I'm going to go head off and shoot, and I'll see you in a bit.
I knelt to pray today, but no one's listening anymore. Do I need to fade away or stay here laying down on the floor? I want to know if you be the shoulder that I need. I want to go, so take me to Neverland. Can you help me find a way? Where is the God that I need? Can I get some help today? Lord, help me with the blood that I bleed. I want to know if you be the shoulder that I need.
Guys, so camera basics. We're talking shutter speed, we're talking aperture, we're talking ISO. Let's take this camera body for example. This can be the shutter speed, but something's missing. Alright, let's take the lens for example. This can be the aperture, but something else is still missing. We still need the ISO. So on top here we have the ISO button. Now all these three things complement each other. All these three things work together with each other. You can't have shutter speed only, and you can't have the aperture only. Like I said, all these three things are essential for a photograph to work properly. Right, so let's move on to shutter speed. What actually is the shutter speed? Simply put, it's the speed that this shutter flap moves up and down. So if I do this, now this one was shot at 1/640, but if I bring it down to 1/10, you can see how much slower the flap goes up and down. So simply put, shutter speed is the amount of time that it takes for the shutter to go up and down. Actually, I found this super cool thing that if I do it like that, it goes super slow, but actually if I bring it all the way up to like 1/1000, look how much faster it goes, or even 1/8000. Look at that. But let me show you something really cool. Now, if I bring it down 4,000 and I just hold it down, how beautiful is that sound? Like, I could just do this the whole day. Like, it just sounds so beautiful. Anyway, so let's get back to shutter speed. Now, when we're talking about shutter speed, we're talking about the amount of light that it traps. In a shutter speed of 1/30, we'll be trapping way less light because, as you saw before, the flap goes down and then it goes up. So when it goes down, it allows that amount of light to come in, but when it comes back up, it captures the light. So 1/30, it'll go much slower and then much slower up, which in turn means it's letting in more light. But if you have a shutter speed of 1/1000 or 1/250, it goes much faster up and down, trapping more light. So that's one use of shutter speed. The other use of shutter speed is that if you want everything in motion, so if I move my hands up like this and you have a shutter speed of 1/25 or 1/200 or 1/250, then you're going to see everything in motion. It basically freezes that image right as it is. So you can see it in this example. But if I lower the shutter speed and I bring it down to 1/25 or 1/10 or 1/5, and if I move my hands up and down like that, you're going to see a whole lot more blur. You wouldn't capture everything. You'll probably capture me jumping and maybe capture half my body still in the air and half my body on the ground. And that's because the camera captures the movement in a more delayed response, or in a more delayed type of style. And you get that kind of blur because the camera captures the movement in a much slower rhythm, in a much slower speed. So it basically allows me to jump, and by the time I hit down, it might not even finish capturing yet. So that's the use of a slower shutter speed. Now we're talking about aperture. As you can see here, aperture is a ring. It's a ring that allows the amount of light through. So look at this beautiful piece of glass. If I shorten my aperture, then it's going to close and you won't see as much of the glass. But if I make my aperture bigger, you'll see all of the glass just like you are now. So a smaller aperture ring means f15 to f20 or even f12 or even f10. But a bigger aperture ring means f2.8 all the way down to f1.2. So a bigger aperture ring allows more light entering the camera. A smaller aperture ring allows less light to enter the camera. If we're talking about depth of field in aperture, which means the amount of clarity and the amount that you can actually see inside a photo, then a aperture of 15 or aperture of 20 or 10, so a smaller aperture ring means everything will be in focus, everything will be clear. So you'll see me, you'll see the background, if there's any background, everything in that photo will be sharp. But if we bring it down to f2.8 or if we bring it down to f1.2, then you'll obviously see a sort of like blurred background and only I will be in focus. So if we're taking a portrait, for example, you'll just see my face. Everything else will be blurred in the background, and that's the difference between the two different apertures. So landscape photographers, for example, they'll be using much higher apertures and much smaller aperture rings because they want to get the whole landscape sharp. They want to get every single thing in detail. But if you're shooting portraits, or if you're shooting like some bokeh shots or anything that requires a shallow depth of field, you'll be shooting on f2.8 or an f1.2. Now the third and final one is ISO. So what is ISO? Well, ISO is basically just artificial light. The higher you bring the ISO, the more artificial light it brings into the photo and the more it brightens up your photo. But if you bring it up too high, so if you go to ISO 2000, ISO 3000, ISO 4000, you're going to start to see that gross little grain that sort of like comes into your photo. It's almost like little ants peeking into your photo. But some cameras are much better in low light situation than other cameras. But essentially a rule of thumb is never to go higher than ISO 2 or maximum 3000. The only time you would be using ISO is in a very low light situation, like at a nightclub or at night taking night photography photos, anything that has a really low amount of light. So we've spoken about shutter speed, we've spoken about aperture, and we've spoken about ISO, which is artificial light entering the camera. Now let's do a recap of all three of them. So shutter speed, we now know that it's the speed of the shutter going up and down. So a fast shutter speed would be 1/400 because it flaps up and down really quickly. A slow shutter speed would be 1/30 because it flaps slower and then comes back up. We also now know that a faster shutter speed of 1/400 or 1/300 traps much more light than a shutter speed of 1/30, which traps much less light. For aperture, we know that it's a ring, and the ring can either be really big or it can be really small. A much bigger and open ring means that you're allowing much more light to flow in through to the camera sensor, but a much smaller ring means you're allowing much less light to flow into the camera sensor. When we're talking about depth of field in aperture, we learned that a f-stop of 15 or f-stop of 10 or f-stop of 20 means everything will be sharp, everything will be in focus. Me, the background, everything is in focus. But if it's an f-stop of 2.8 or f-stop of 1.2 or anywhere in between, we know that only I will be in focus and the background will be blurred, just like when you're taking a portrait. So now we know that we need aperture, shutter speed and ISO to make a great photograph. When you're out in the field and shooting, it makes it so much easier when you know your camera basics to apply your creativity to any single shot, because you'll know, right, shutter speed, I need to increase it or decrease it. Aperture, I need to increase it or decrease it. I want everything to be in focus, so I want to have a higher f-stop. Or I want to have a really creative shot, low depth of field, I want to have a smaller aperture of 2.8 or 1.2. Once you realize that all of these, once you know all your camera basics, it's going to make shooting and your life so much easier. So that's it for today. Hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.
Well, stay laying down on the floor. I want to know if you be the shoulder that I need. I want to go, so take me to Neverland.